Dang, there's a lot of interest out there to the new Sony FX30, but there's also a lot of similarities that it has with the ZV-E10. So before I pre-ordered it, I wanted to dive in and see what the differences were between these two cameras to make sure that the extra cost of the FX30 is really worth it. I ended up pre-ordering the FX30, but I thought I would share with you what I found so you can know which camera is better for you. I've had the ZV-E10 for over a year, and I've not only used it for YouTube videos, but also real world filmmaking and client shoots. And I'll be making a video about my 1-year review with the ZV-E10 maybe in the next video. But for now, let's just stick to these two cameras and do a direct comparison between them. First, we're gonna talk about the similarities, then the differences, and then why I decided to pre-order the FX30 today on the Film Alliance. To start off, both of these cameras are Aps-c and Sony E-mount. Neither have viewfinders, neither have built-in flash, both have fully articulating LCD displays, both displays are 3 inches, both have touchscreen, which I find super helpful, especially when I'm on a gimbal. Both have USB charging and HDMI output and Wi-Fi. Although the USB on the FX30 is 3.2 Gen 2, which will give you a faster transfer speed than the ZV-E10. And the FX30 has a full-size HDMI out. Both have microphone and headphone ports for monitoring your audio. Both have the same size sensor, but the FX30 has a much newer and faster sensor, coupled with a powerful Bion XZ processor, which technically should give you less rolling shutter than the older sensor in the ZV-E10. Both of these cameras were created for content creators, but the FX30 is geared more towards filmmaking, whereas the ZV-E10 is geared more towards vlogging. Now let's talk a little bit about the differences. The first is obviously the price. The FX30 comes in at $1798 body only, and the ZV-E10 is $698 body only. Now let's talk about the body. The FX30 actually has 5 different mounting points to add different accessories such as lights, microphones, and monitors, and just whatever accessory you can think of, whereas the ZV-E10 doesn't have any mounting points. So you really can't build it out unless you buy a cage for it. The FX30 is geared more towards filmmaking, and that's one of the benefits of having those different mounting points. The weight of the FX30 comes in at 646 grams with battery and memory included, and the weight of the ZV-E10 is 343 grams. So the ZV-E10 is significantly lighter than the FX30. And the ZV-E10 is a lot smaller than the FX30. Now let's talk about internal recording, because that's really what it's all about. The FX30 can shoot in 422 10-bit up to 600 megabits per second, and the Sony ZV-E10 can shoot in 420 8-bit up to 100 megabits per second. The ZV-E10's 8-bit 420 is okay for footage, but once you start getting into the color grading aspect of color grading your footage, that's when the ZV-E10 is going to show its limitations. Whereas when you can shoot in 422 10-bit with the FX30, now you can really dive into your color grades and have a lot more room to edit your footage. And that's just internal. If you're recording to an external monitor like the Ninja 5, then you can record in 16-bit linear RAW, which is an enormous difference than when you're shooting straight out of camera with the ZV-E10. So obviously the FX30 has a lot more capabilities when it comes to recording high quality videos. Now, even though the FX30 is created more towards videos, it does have 26 megapixels, where the ZV-E10 only has 24.2 megapixels for still photography. Now, that's such a small difference that I don't think you would see a difference when it comes to shooting photography with both of these cameras, but it is on the spec sheet, so I figured we would cover it. The FX30 has in-body stabilization and the ZV-E10 does not. But that's not a big deal for me because I think that that is more for shooting photography. But both cameras do have active stabilization, which is a digital stabilization, and its new gyro stabilization, where you can take your footage into somewhere like Sony Catalyst, as long as you're shooting with a high shutter speed, and stabilize your footage that way. Both cameras can shoot in 4K, but the FX30 can shoot up to 120 frames per second, with a 1.6 times crop, whereas the ZV-E10 can only shoot up to 30 frames per second in 4K. When it comes to 1080, the FX30 can shoot up to 240 frames per second, and the ZV-E10 can shoot up to 120. So if you're into slow motion or you're a wedding videographer and you want to get those super slow motion shots in 4K, then the FX30 would be your go-to camera. The autofocus on the FX30 is definitely superior with 495 focus points, whereas the ZV-E10 has 425 focus points. The max shutter speed on the FX30 is 1/8000, and the max shutter on the ZV-E10 is 1/4000. The LCD display on the FX30 is definitely going to be superior than the ZV-E10 because you get 2.36 million dots, whereas the LCD on the display of the ZV-E10 comes in at 921,600 dots. Now when it comes to storage, the FX30 has 2 slots for UHS-2 card slots, but it can also accept the CF Express Type A cards. And the ZV-E10 has 1 slot for UHS-1 memory card. So the FX30 can not only shoot faster, but it can record faster with much higher quality settings. The FX30 takes FZ100 batteries, whereas the ZV-E10 takes FW50s. So with that bigger battery size, you're going to get a lot more battery life out of the FX30 than you would with the ZV-E10. Now, as far as video goes, I've gotten close to 3 hours out of my A7S III with that same exact battery that the FX30 takes, and I get about an hour and a half to 2 with the battery out of the ZV-E10. But that's not continuous recording, that's just run and gun, getting shots as I go from scene to scene. Now the FX30 doesn't have product showcase like the ZV-E10 does, but again, it's not really made for that type of videography. It's made more for controlled filmmaking. The FX30 has all of the picture profiles, including S-Cinetone and Cine-EI, which is really geared toward getting the most dynamic range out of your camera that you can, because it only gives you 2 ISOs to choose from, which is actually its dual base ISO. One is at 800 and one is 2500. Whereas the ZV-E10 has all of the picture profiles, not including S-Cinetone and Cine-EI. So you get the S-Log3s, the HLGs, and the Cine2s. But because the FX30 has that dual base ISO, just like my A7S III, then you really are gonna be able to get unbelievable low light shots. So now on to why I pre-ordered the FX30, mainly because my main A cam is my A7S III and my B cam is an A7 III, so the internal recording is not going to live up to the standard of the A7S III. No matter how much I try to work with the picture profiles, or even on my ZV-E10 as a C cam, or my ZV-1 as a D cam, they're not going to live up to that picture quality that my A7S III has. So I'm picking up this camera to be an actual B cam for actual real world filming out there, maybe like a client headshot. It'll be a nice looking B cam shot. Also, there's a lot of interest about this FX30, so I know there's going to be a ton of video ideas for me with the FX30 to go out and make more YouTube videos. I think that the FX30 is really geared towards people who are wanting to take that next step in filmmaking and really take themselves to the next level, whereas the ZV-E10 is more of a beginner camera for someone who really just wants to break the ice and understand lighting and exposure and just learning about it all. Now, don't get me wrong, the ZV-E10 is an excellent camera, and if that's what you purchased, or if that's what you have, or if that's what you decide to buy, that's an unbelievable first camera. In fact, like I said, I'm going to make an entire review after 1 year video, maybe later this week, about the ZV-E10 because that's how much I like it. So I don't want to just disregard the ZV-E10 as just being like, oh, that's a beginner camera. You should get the real camera, which is the FX30, because I really do love the ZV-E10. I just happen to think that the FX30 is geared more towards maybe intermediate users, someone who's on their way up, where they are really trying to take their craft to the next level and be more intentional about their shots. Another great thing about the picture profiles out of the FX30 is that you can actually burn your LUTs into the image, or you can just monitor what your image is going to look like with the LUT preloaded, and then you can just color grade it the way you want in post. And I think that's a huge help when it comes to a lot of the picture profiles and S-Logs and trying to understand how to expose for all of that. So this is a huge upgrade, and I'm super excited to be able to have that ability. Now, don't be afraid of Aps-c cameras just because you have that 1.5 times crop. I really have never had that much of an issue as far as image quality goes. I think that Aps-c cameras are almost like a little art form amongst themselves. I prefer full frames just because that gives me a little bit more to work with. But when I'm using an Aps-c, like a different part of my brain is used, and I'm able to maybe enter and dive into that creative aspect a little bit more, so my shots are always different when I'm using APS-C. Another great thing about having an APS-C camera like the FX30 is you can use your full frame lenses on the camera. So maybe you already have a full frame set up and you have a bunch of full frame lenses like I do. I don't have to worry about going out and buying a bunch of APS-C lenses because I already have my full frame lenses ready to go. So I hope this video helped you better understand which one of these two cameras is better for you. Thankfully, when they ship it to me, I'll have both cameras and I'll be able to do a better in-depth look at both of them, and we can do image comparisons and cinematic video tests and just things of that nature. But for now, I know a lot of people are thinking about or struggling with which one of these two cameras they should buy. So I hope I brought some clarity to that and helped you make a better decision. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance, and I'm learning all of this stuff just as you are. So hopefully you got some value from this video and I was able to help you along your journey, because I know you guys helped me in the comment section. Have a nice week.